think we can begin. Hello everybody, I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Pascal FREY. I'm a forest pathologist working with INRAE, the National Institute of Research for Agronomy, Food, Agriculture, Food and the Environment in France. So Neil McRoberts, sitting here from UC Davis, and myself will share this keynote session on the global plant health assessment. But first, a few words of introduction. Plant health is a common good for humanity. The Global Plant Health Assessment, GPHA, is an initiative that was launched by the International Society of Plant Pathology during the International Year of Plant Health in 2020. A worldwide team of plant pathologists was commissioned by the ICPP Executive Committee to coordinate the GPHA project. These were Serge Savary, Paul ESKER, Neil McRoberts, Laetitia Villequet, Sarah Pettibridge, Andy Nelson, and some others. The ambition of the GPHA was to achieve a first science-based snapshot of plant health in important natural and human-managed ecosystems worldwide, and to assess the consequences of the plant health status on several ecosystem services provided by the plant system. The GPHA initiative was supervised by a coordination group of about 10 people, and the assessment of plant health in different ecoregions were made by a global consortium of almost 100 scientists from 30 countries. But I won't go further into the details since the speakers will present them. For these keynote sessions, the coordination group of the GPHA decided to give voice to 3 very young female scientists who did an amazing work in the coordination of the GPHA. You have their names in the program: Federica BOVE from Italy, Manjari SINGH, and Sonam SAH from India. Unfortunately, Sonam SAH did not receive her authorization from her institute to come to the ICPP. So at the last minute, we decided to replace 1 young female scientist coming from the Global South by, as they call themselves, 2 old white male scientists who are Neil McRoberts and Paul ESKER. And I can include myself in the old white male scientist. So I will introduce our first speaker, Federica BOVE. Federica earned a PhD in 2019 at the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Piacenza, Italy. She worked on epidemiological modeling in the lab of Vittorio Rossi. Then she continued as a postdoc working on epidemiological modeling in the same lab. And then she was recently hired as a researcher at Corteva Agriscience in Italy. So Federica, if you want to come.
Okay, so I'm really pleased to be here, and I really want to thank the ISPP for this opportunity and the organization committee of the Global Plant Health Assessment. I'm here to basically try to tell you the story of this effort of the Global Plant Health Assessment, which is an initiative of the International Society for Plant Pathology. This story started with a question raised by a group of scientists, and this question was how healthy plants are in the world. So can we assess the state and evolution of plant health across the world? We may all agree that plant health matters in the everyday life of everyone. In fact, healthy plants provide food, fiber, and materials. Forests regulate the Earth's climate in storing carbon, and regulate also the water cycle. But also they produce the oxygen we breathe. Household gardens are even of peace and nutrition for everyone. And the life in our cities is made more bearable because of the urban forests, so the parks and the trees in our cities. it's simple. There could not be human life without healthy plants. And in order to raise the global awareness on this, the United Nations declared 2020 the International Year of Plant Health. And this is the context where the Executive Committee of ISPP sanctioned the conduction of the Global Plant Health Assessment and commissioned a small team of experts to coordinate an ISPP-wide project. Basically, the overall goal of the Global Plant Health Assessment was to provide, for the first time, an overview of the state of plant health and of the consequences of this on the plant system's performance on the Earth. This assessment needed to be global, as just is the ISPP, and the state of plant health have been compared in different plant systems and in different environments, so in contrasting parts of the world, from the global north to the global south. Another goal of the Global Plant Health Assessment was to identify the evolution of plant health, so how plant health is going in our world and in different regions. The overall framework of the Global Plant Health Assessment mainly focuses on pathogens, but it also included some harmful and abiotic stresses, mainly linked to climate change, when associated with diseases. The focus was on all those plant systems on Earth that, so whether human-made and natural-made, that have an impact on the way we live. So those plant systems were forests, agrosystems, so both field crops and perennial crops, horticultural systems, so peri-urban horticulture and household gardens as well, and the plants in our cities, so the urban forest. In order to address such a big diversity, some simple and generic operational definitions were needed. And those definitions needed to be suitable for plant pathologists working in different plant systems, so plant pathologists working in forests, in fields, or in gardens. And starting with the definition of what is a plant system, we may say that a plant system is, may contain a relatively limited botanical diversity, for example, in agrosystem. But other ecosystems are extremely diverse, or even hyper-diverse. We can think to the Amazon forest. So we can look, if we want to analyze the diversity, we can use a concept that was established by the ecologists. This concept was the concept of keystone plant species. And we use this concept to look at this element of a plant system. So this was a first simplification that was undertaken by the Global Plant Health Assessment. Thanks to those simplifications, the experts involved in the project were able to identify 16 main plant systems that you can see represented in this slide by those icons representing the keynote species that were addressed. And here you can see how those keystone species, so the plant systems, are distributed over the world. And so you can see that the major food crop systems have been selected, but also the major perennial agricultural systems. And also horticultural systems such as the peri-urban and household gardens, and the major forests that impact on our life. The second concept that we needed to define in order to go through the Global Plant Health Assessment was the concept of plant health. Actually, plant health is a difficult concept, because if we consider the array of causes that may generate disease, healthy may also become a relative concept. So one individual can be more or less healthy. This is why we opted for a narrow definition of plant health, and we focused mainly on the concept of disease, which is easier. And we restricted the assessment to plant pathogens. Sometimes plant pathologists use concepts that are already established in medicine, and medical doctors actually have a metric for defining and for measure the healthy. And in particular, this metric is the disability adjusted life year. And with using this metric, medical doctors are able to measure the disease burden, the overall disease burden. But in this case, we are not able to use the same metric because plant pathologists deal with many different species, plant species with different life cycle durations. And then, of course, each plant species has multiple diseases with multiple pathogens. And another difficulty is that plant health is not depending only on infection causes by pathogen. So in this case, we are not able to use this metric. And we can say that the concept of plant health doesn't allow to obtain an easy measurement, and this is why we used instead the concept of disease. But one concept that was used in the global plant health assessment was also the concept of ecosystem services generated by healthy plants. And the topic of ecosystem services will be addressed by the second talk by Manjari, just after this one. So how was assessed plant health in this project? For assessing plant health, a pragmatic qualitative approach have been used, and this approach was similar to that of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment of the United Nations Environmental Programme of 2000. And this came up with the use of 3 scales that you can see in these slides. So the first scale is about the state of plant health over the past 30 years with 5 grades, from excellent to bad. A second scale was about the evolution, the evolution of plant health over the more recent 10 years with 3 possible patterns, so declining, improving, or stable. And the scale that you see on the right is a complementary scale where experts in charge of a given plant system would rate their confidence in their own assessment. So they may be very confident, reasonably confident, or uncertain on the basis of the information that they find on the literature. To concluding the definition, another important concept to be defined was the concept of ecoregions. Ecoregions are those parts of the world which share similar traits in terms of an environmental point of view, from an ecological standpoint, but for soil, for climate, and so on. But also those parts of land that share, that have a similar socio-cultural context. So in terms of ecoregions, the world state of play for the global plant health assessment had to take into account that the human population is unevenly distributed on Earth. And we can think to Asia, which is home to over 4 billion people. And over the last decades, megacities, it means cities with more than 10 million people, have proliferating. And also, over the last decades, the biodiversity has dramatically declined. Even the biodiversity in the hotspot of Earth. The state of play had also to include climate and climate change, and also the consequences that these have on the planet. In fact, many regions from sub-Saharan Africa, Brazil, Europe, and Southeast Asia, but also other regions in the world are facing with water shortage. And this, together with extreme temperatures and extreme weather events, are bound to increase in the decades to come. Lastly, the world state of play has to account also for the fact that also food production and food demand are unevenly distributed on the planet, with several food sources and a number of food sinks. And the demand for food in those food sinks is bound to increase. It's to be noticed the situation in sub-Saharan Africa, and here the demand for food is bound to increase because of the population is growth rapidly. So as a result of all these considerations, this is the state of play for the global plant health assessment. And as you can see, a series of plant systems, each represented by keystone species, were selected in different ecoregions of the world. So we have forest systems and field crop systems, so coffee, citrus, potato, and others, horticultural systems, and household gardens, and urban vegetation, in particular the plane tree in Europe. And each point that you see on this map was a plant system assessed by a group of experts involved, and as you can imagine, this project accounted for many different situations, and so it requires the involvement of many people, many researchers, and there were 43 institutions involved in the global plant health assessment, and they were from 19 different countries in the world. Those are this is the list of the name, but just to say that only that about 100 people were involved in this project, and those experts were grouped into 28 groups in order to be able to work together and to address each plant system. So what about the procedure? As I mentioned before, this project has been conducted involving volunteer scientists with the support of the ISPP. And this group of scientists was organized as a collective, and they worked on a common good, which is plant health. The assessment was performed through a common questionnaire, so a very simple but not simplistic questionnaire, which was sent to the various experts. And those questionnaires included some quick key questions that experts were able to answer based on scientific evidences, so available literature. And those reports were finally cross-reviewed by the coordination group, and finally they were published in a book. And this book is open access, is available on the internet or on the ISPP website, but also on the Global Plant Health Assessment website. So I invite you to go and to see this book. We can summarize the step of this assessment with looking at this flowchart. Basically, first of all, a list of ecoregion and plant system were provided, and the group made a choice of ecoregion and plant systems. And groups of experts described those ecoregion per plant systems considered, and they provide a justification for the keystone plant species to include in the assessment. Then there were 4 questions that you can see in the following 4 part of the flowchart. 2 questions were about the state of plant health and the evolution of plant health, respectively. And the state of plant health was assessed for the past 30 years for each plant system, whereas the evolution was assessed over the last 10 years. Then other 2 questions were about the ecosystem services. So the time frame was the same, 30 years and 10 years. And this will be the topic of the second talk of this keynote session, so stay tuned. And last step of this assessment was to add complementary information, including the level of confidence of the experts on the assessment they done. So what you can see on this map is the overall snapshot of the status of plant health and on the evolution of plant health, using the two qualitative scales that I described before. As you can see, there is a wide diversity on the plant health status, with several poor conditions on the status of plant health. We can look at coffee in Central America, or many crops in Sub-Saharan Africa, also plant trees in Europe, and potato in East Asia. Also, the evolution of plant health was variable, and many trends, unfortunately, indicate a decline in plant health. If we focus on crops, those crops that represent the main source for food of the planet, so basically wheat, maize, potato, and rice, we can see that we have a good situation in the status of plant health for maize, wheat, potato in North and Central America, and also in Europe, and also for rice in Southeast Asia. The evolution of plant health is stable in America over the last 10 years, but there is a declining in the status of plant health in Europe and South Asia. If we focus on Sub-Saharan Africa, on food crops, we can see that the situation is poor. So we have plant health which is poor in maize, in cassava, and plantain, and only horticultural here is fair in status. But all the evolution trends are declining over the last 10 years. If you look at, if you focus on the fruit plantation and vegetable crops, we can see that in the global north of the planet, we have a good state of play, and except for citrus in North America, which is fair and declining, and the state of plant health is fair, but we have also some good situation in the global south. Then I would like also to focus on forests and urban vegetation. So for the temperate forests, you can see that the state is fair, and the situation is declining. There is also declining in Australia for the eucalyptus forest, and plant trees in Europe also have a good, poor situation in plant health, and also in this case, the situation is declining. Okay, I cannot discuss all the plant systems in each ecoregions undertaken by the Global Plant Health Assessment, but I would like to end my talk focusing on some plant systems, starting with rice. So what you can see in this table is an excerpt of the Global Plant Health Assessment report. So I invite you to check to this report on the book, which is open access, as I mentioned before. And in the case of rice, 3 main ecoregions were selected, so Southeast Asia, East Asia, and South Asia. And here the authors reported the emerging of several diseases, which seems to be under control thanks to disease resistance plants. The state of health was reported as good in Southeast Asia and East Asia, but fair in South Asia. And evolution is declining because of the emergence of the multiple diseases that I mentioned. Concerning another plant system, we can look at potato, and also in this case, 3 global ecoregions have been considered. Here, it has been noticed that there were new threats in South America for emerging diseases, but also in Europe, in particular for the emergence of new Phytophthora infestans strains, which are able to overcome plant resistance and also fungicides. And here the status was declining for South America and East Asia. The situation is particularly concerning in East Asia, and this is because here seed systems are not so implemented. In the other ecoregions, South America and Europe, the situation is good and stable for Europe, but declining for South America. If we look at vegetables in peri-urban and household systems, here we can look at 3 different ecoregions in the planet, and as you can imagine, in those plant systems there is an extreme diversity in terms of several aspects, but many diseases have been also reported. The state of health is fair in sub-Saharan Africa, with also a declining in the status of plant health. And many crop losses have been reported. Also in South Asia, the situation of plant health is fair, but the evolution is increasing. Because here diseases are taken under an efficient control by breeding programs, microbial biological control, but also chemical pesticides. Then in Southeast Asia, yes, the plant health was good, but still declining over the last 10 years. If we look at the managed softwood forests of North America, as you can imagine, in this plant system, there is a huge diversity. So the keystone species on which the assessment was focused were 5. And in particular here, the major concern that led to an assessment which is fair and declining was the white pine blister rust. And the authors were reasonably confident with their assessment on that. To conclude this talk, last example is on oaks of Western Europe and North America. In these 2 ecoregions, many diseases have been reported, and most of them are invasive, caused by invasive pathogens. In both the ecoregions, the situation of plant health was fair and declining, especially because of those invasive pathogens, but also for abiotic stresses and on climate change factor, which was conducive to new emerging diseases. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and also to the coordination group for let me to do this talk. Thank you.
So if you have questions, does it work? Do you hear me? If you have questions, if you're not too shy, you can go down to the 2 microphones that are here and ask directly your questions. Otherwise, you can use the app, and there are already some questions in the app. So perhaps we begin with one question from the app. So somebody asked, how did you normalize BASs introduced by expert effects?
Sorry, can you read again?
How did you normalize BASs introduced by experts effect?
I don't.
Bias, yeah, bias.
Yeah. Actually, I think that you can find this information. I really don't know. I think you can find this information on the reports. So as I mentioned before, those reports are accessed on the website. Many plant systems have been considered, and so you can read the book where those information are contained.
You have one? We have one question over there.
Hi, that was an excellent talk.
Thank you.
I think this is a great idea, and I look forward to seeing it developed more. I do have it's not a major criticism. I just wanted to kind of use this question as a launching board for future iterations. It's just to point out that, for example, with the oak decline in North America, this is primarily a result of management practices. So there are pathogens involved. And so I'm wondering how you will incorporate management potentially into future assessments, particularly in forestry systems or systems that are more not as intensively managed, if you have plans to do that.
Yeah, for sure, the reports, so also for the systems that you mentioned, the experts considered also the management that is performed in the plant system and on the keystone species that are selected. So this is absolutely one information that must be included in order to assess the status of plant health and evolution. So we need to take into account this information, and yes, over the past 10 years in order to evaluate also the evolution of plant health. So yes, good point. After this session, there will be also a roundtable. So maybe we can also take this point to discuss more on that.
There is another question over there.
Well, as a 50-year plant pathologist, I was wondering what was the percentage of plant pathologists and entomologists involved in this effort, first. Second, health means it's not diseased, first of all. And this applies in cultivated crops. I mean, forests we are unable to intervene. I mean, we can't control Keratocystis platani, for example, or the disease you referred to. The difference among the cropping systems applied in north and south are also different. How you can compare these things, and what is the contribution eventually of the group to the plant health and plant pathology? I'm not critical, I'm trying to get information, right?
Yes, sure. Actually, those questions have been asked also by the group of experts that undertaken this project. So they raised those questions that are actually that needed to be undertaken to conduct such a to account for this diversity, because there is a huge diversity assessed in this effort. Actually, you are right. So health is not a disease, but in order to conduct a difficult and a challenging project, we need simplifications. So in order to start this effort, that we will continue with the effort of, I hope, all the plant pathologists and other experts on Earth, we started to defining what is plant health and what we can consider. So we use the operational definition, so those definitions that allow us to operate and to start this assessment. So as mentioned before, this is why I was focusing on definitions. We need to know what we are looking at. So we cannot look at the health because it's a wide concept, but we can look at disease caused by pathogen. And this simplifies the assessment. For sure, we can add complexity later on, but we need to start with something which is qualitative because many information are missing, and we need to start from one point. And this was a starting point. So thank you for your questions.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to continue. There are many questions in the chat, namely about the future of GPHA, and I encourage you to come to the round table after this keynote session. We will discuss about the future of this project, so we'll have, you can ask those questions. So, you? Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome our next speaker to the platform. Dr. Manjari Singh received her PhD in 2022 from the Pant University, Pantnagar, India, where she worked on statistical relationships between weather and disease development. And Dr. Singh is currently a scientist with the Alliance of Biodiversity International in SIAT in Senegal. Please welcome Dr. Singh.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank our first speaker, who gave a very nice overview of the global plant health assessment and also the state of plant health across the world. So now, in the second talk of this keynote session on global plant health assessment, I shall present our results regarding the consequences of this plant health on ecosystem services. The global plant health assessment is basically focused on plant. Can you hear me? Sorry. The global plant health assessment is focused on plant pathogens. Declaring that a plant is diseased is somewhat easy. One can say that the crop or our plant is diseased just by having some visual examination and then followed by lab testing and further experimentation if it is needed. However, if we have to say that our crop is healthy, so it is a little bit difficult. And it is especially difficult when we have some latent infection or in cases where there are symptoms that are very slow to express themselves. Therefore, plant health as a concept is not conducive to any operational definition because it does not allow any easy measurements. However, ecosystem services, they can be translated into metrics that a community of scientists we can use, means we can agree first and then we can use those metrics. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment conducted in the year 2000 by the UNEP defined and used the concept of ecosystem services. The Global Plant Health Assessment also used the same concept, considering only 3 types of ecosystem services: provisioning, regulating, and cultural spiritual. The supporting ecosystem services, such as nutrient cycling or water cycling, and the production of oxygen from plants, and soil formation. So these have very long time constants, and therefore these were not considered in our present global plant health assessment. The concept of ecosystem services can better be defined through examples. So starting with provisioning services, the provisioning services refer to all the material benefits we derive from nature. It includes the food, fuel, fiber, material, or fresh water. The regulating services refer to the processes that enable functioning of ecosystem and also the cycles. The benefits that we derive are climatic regulation, control of soil erosion, water regulation, water purification, maintenance of air quality, biological control of pests and pathogens, for example. Then the cultural spiritual services, these are the services, these are the non-material services that we derive from from the nature. So this includes example like the spirituality, recreation, or the art, inspiration. So from an anthropocentric standpoint of view, one may see the world in 3 groups of elements. Oh, sorry. One at the center, one at the center of this slide that refers to these ecosystem services. Another on the right-hand side that refers to the consequences for humans. And on the left, it refers to the different factors of global changes. So starting from the left, ecosystem services are affected by different factors of global changes, like human population, human activity, climate change, and biodiversity collapse. At the center, ecosystem services directly affect humans in their daily needs, either materially or spiritually, and also their environment. And the right-hand side represents the consequences of these ecosystem services being generated or reduced, being improved or suppressed. So changes in these ecosystem services generation has consequences at different scales. Like at the global scale, it is manifested as climate change. At the social and local scale, it includes political and social stability, economic performance, or social welfare. Similarly, at the local, at the individual and household scales, it includes food and nutrition and health of individuals, including mental health. So overall, here we can see that the plant diseases affect all elements of ecosystem services. And at the same time, plant diseases are affected by the same drivers of global changes. That is the climate change, human activities, and biodiversity. Then coming to the definition of ecosystem services that we have already defined. So how it is useful? So with provisioning, it allows metrics for the raw material, with provisioning, it allows metrics for food production as well as the production of raw materials. With regulating, it allows considering at least along the qualitative scale the performance of ecosystem in their regulation role. So the global plant health assessment has considered both man-made ecosystems and natural ecosystems, and therefore the natural ecosystems may therefore be fully considered with respect to the regulating services. And there is a third category of ecosystem services that encompasses all other benefits generated by the ecosystems. These cultural and spiritual services, they cannot be directly quantified. However, we can make some broad general assessment so that we can have some the effect of plant health on these services. Now coming to the results of the global plant health assessment and how the plant health has affected different ecosystem services. So this map is showing the effect of plant health on provisioning services. Here we can see that there is a tremendous variation across the plant system, and there is no apparent structure in plant system's response. Similarly, the global plant health assessment also generated results for the regulating services. And again, here we can see that the plant system's response is highly variable. And the global plant health assessment also generated results for the cultural and spiritual services. However, as you can see, there were very few results because data were not available everywhere. So wherever we could find data set, so we have the results. Examining each map of the ecosystem services in each ecoregion and each plant system would not be possible in a few minutes. So I will proceed with the examples to highlight the key features of global plant health assessment. The examples that I will use will be the same as was used in the first talk of this session. So let me start with the consequences of consequences of plant health on ecosystem services generated by rice across the world. So a critically important service generated by rice across the world is rice agrosystem is food provisioning. 3 global ecoregions were considered for rice system: Southeast Asia, East Asia, and South Asia. The state of food provisioning from rice agrosystem were good to excellent. And And there has been a steady increase in the rice production in the last 30 years. But this could have been achieved by using a lot of water, a lot of pesticide, and a lot of fertilizer. And this had some environmental cost. So in the last decade, there has been a steady increase in these costs. And this also implies that there is a steady decline in the total factor productivity from these systems. The evolution of provisioning from rice is stable to decreasing. Another example concerns potato production across the world. An important service generated by potato is also food provisioning. Global ecoregions considered for potato were South America, East Asia, and Europe. The state of food provisioning from potato, as affected by plant pathogens, were fair to poor for a whole area of regions. A key set of regions were related to potato seed, which are highly vulnerable to multiple pathogens. In all ecoregions, potato late blight, which is caused by Phytophthora infestans, is a serious threat as it was decades ago. Similarly, in East Asia, early blight that is caused by Alternaria solani, it is also extremely serious. With regard to the evolution of disease impact on services, improvements are slow, again because of the nature of potato seed, which are hard to produce, hard to transport and store, and they are also fragile. The climate change and emerging diseases, some of which are emerging, are challenges to any progress that can be made in these systems. In South America, some regulating services were also documented, and in that case, there was farming encroachment of the mountain ecosystems, and that was done to escape the plant diseases. And what we know that because of increasing temperature and climate change, it would not be possible to manage especially potato late blight, even if we are moving in the upper altitudes. So as a result, farmers are still using more pesticides, and therefore residue accumulation occur in these systems. Another example concerns vegetables in peri-urban and household systems. Vegetables in these systems are extraordinarily important across the world, again because, especially in terms of food provisioning from the nutritional standpoint, but also for their regulating and cultural roles. These were considered in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. The range of pathogens in these systems is so large that it cannot be listed here. It includes bacteria, viruses, fungi, oomycetes, nematodes. So these pathogens, they can be seed-borne, soil-borne, they can be vector-borne, or they can be airly transmitted. So disease management in these systems is relatively challenging. Also, a key feature of these systems is that they are perennial in nature. So a piece of land that is dedicated for a given vegetable production remains so for an extended period of time. And so this is conducive for the survival of soil-borne pathogens, and also it favors multiplication and interspecies cross-infection. However, overall, the Global Plant Health Assessment finds that the state of provisioning is sustained except the Sub-Saharan Africa. There were, however, serious regulating issues related to pesticide use, soils, and resources, including water. We also noted that a high use of pesticides, especially some of the banned and dangerous toxic pesticides in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And this situation has been unchanged for the last 40 years. Managed softwood forest of North America is my another example. Yes, the managed softwood forest of North America, this generates a wide range of products. from wood for timber and this can be used for a host of industrial purposes. The Global Plant Health Assessment finds that the state of services in these systems is fair, but it is declining. The assessment also raises grave questions regarding multiple ecosystem services, which cannot be assessed yet. Just one minute. The contributing experts, they have noted that provisioning losses resulting from atmospheric and the provisioning losses resulting from disrupted atmospheric and water regulations that has not been quantified yet, and this appears to be a global information gap. The experts also noted that fewer healthy trees contribute less to the carbon and water cycle. The recent decline of tree health might have far-reaching consequences, which cannot be quantified in the present assessment. Oak-based forest of Western Europe and North America is my last example. The oak-based forest of Europe and North America generates a wide range of products from high-quality timber to food. The many species of oaks are sources of critically important provisioning, regulating, and cultural services that can be excellent timber to cork and many symbols that are associated with the oak trees. A key contribution of oak forest is carbon sequestration, and therefore it is involved in the climate regulation. However, the Global Plant Health Assessment has found that oak-based forest, that the state of services in oak-based forest is excellent. However, it is declining in many cases. This decline is attributable mainly to the plant diseases. However, it is also associated with the interaction of droughts, flood, insect, and pathogen. And this decline will inevitably contribute to biodiversity loss. I think we have to conclude now. Then each of these 30-some reports that we have generated in this Global Plant Health Assessment for a given plant system in a given ecoregion is in itself a case study. What the Global Plant Health Assessment generates is an overview, a mental map where further investigation is needed, and places where data are lacking. And it sets a set of domain where further research, extension, or education would be necessary. Critically, the Global Plant Health Assessment helps posit the field of plant pathology with other fields of science in order to address the plant health in a relevant and meaningful way. Before closing, it would be remiss of me to not mention the state of plant health and its consequences on food security in sub-Saharan Africa. The state of provisioning as affected by plant health in sub-Saharan Africa is poor to fair at best. Plant diseases are often caused by hard-to-manage diseases, many of which are caused by soil. Many of these diseases are soil-borne, viral, or bacterial, and sometimes they are persistent and they can have multiple secondary hosts. The challenges faced by the public extension system and research are massive. So these are the contributors to this Global Plant Health Assessment. So thank you very much for your patience. And if you have some questions, I am here to answer.
So if there are any questions, please come by the microphone. Otherwise, there are several questions in the app. One question is about, is there any plan to incorporate marine or aquatic plant system in future iteration of the GPHA?
Presently, no, it is not there, but yeah, in future we can think about this. But at the same time, we will need expertise from all of you, means whoever is interested in this project. So yeah, in future we can think about this.
Another question on the app. When impacts of plant diseases on services are decreasing, would it not be relevant to consider that the production situation is generating these services?
Sorry, can you repeat?
When the impacts of plant disease on services are decreasing, so the people who asked the question suggest to consider that the production situation is generating these services. I'm not sure I understand
Sorry,
really the
I
question.
cannot understand this question.
Yeah, I think it's more than a comment. Well, a very generic question. Can we conclude from this report that we are losing the battle against plant diseases? Are we, as plant pathologists, doing enough to improve plant health? It's almost a philosophical question. You can address it.
If you can help, so that would be good.
I don't know if you have some ideas of answer.
I think it's the kind of question we can all give a personal opinion to. If the questioner's in the audience, then I would suggest to come to the round table afterwards and
Yes.
make your opinion part of the next iteration of the assessment.
If no more questions, we'll go on for the third talk. So the first talk will be delivered. Thank you, Manjari. The third talk will be delivered by Professor Paul ESKER, who is professor at Pennsylvania State University, and he's an epidemiologist.
Thank you, and as you can see, my role and Neil's role in this talk is really to present what Sonam put together very well. I will take an opportunity. One of the questions that came up was a bit about the methodology behind it and some of the biases. Keep in mind, we had experts across the globe, but this process also went through in 2021, we had a workshop and conference which was held in Toulouse, France, and over Zoom because of COVID restrictions. At that point, we did a deep dive on a lot of these topics that you're bringing up, so they're really relevant questions. And then most importantly, every one of these documents went out to experts for peer review. So again, any questions that could come up were addressed by the authors based on those peer reviews, and there were lead editors throughout this process. So that was done specifically to try to address some of the biases. What Neil and I are going to do here is we're going to take really what happened in the first two talks and kind of do a synthesis. I will do that first part, and then Neil will look at the implications. As you can see, we have lots of information. We're generating a lot of good discussion. We won't be able to cover everything, but we're going to kind of look at it from the perspective of sort of the big picture. So if you remember, and this is a different approach to what Federica talked about in the first talk, the global plant health assessment, sort of the state of play. And what we were trying to do is define large ecoregions based on several factors. We cast a very wide net, so we looked at factors like climate change and areas that would probably be most impacted by water availability. We also looked at the concept of megacities and the urban environment and how that would drive it. We tried to identify ecoregions based on biodiversity or the loss thereof and the impacted diseases. And then also what we would term the breadbasket, areas of large scale, maybe row crop, agronomic crop production, and what that means. Within each of that, we did identify these keystone plant species, as you can see here, the forest species, agricultural systems, peri-urban horticulture and household gardens, and also sort of urban vegetation to try to capture a wide array of different options. So all I'm doing here, this is something you've already seen. I'm just kind of going through and kind of giving you the overall state and trends. We're going to give a little different summary of that coming up. But what you can see is a wide array of colors, from green, what we would define as good, to orange or poor, but without any clear spatial structure, meaning not really even seeing patterns across some of the like systems as we go forward. Most of the trends are stable, what we would define by those level arrows, or declining arrows going down at that level. And very few arrows are up to indicate improvement of plant health in this sort of situation. And I think your questions are hitting on some of those ideas quite well. In terms of using the ecosystem services as a metrics for plant health, this was our second talk. You know, as you see, we can't really measure it in a clear sense. Each of us would probably have a slightly different definition of what that may or may not mean. So putting that in operational terms would be very challenging. But what we do understand is that the consequences of good or poor plant health may be assessed in terms of the ecosystem services generated. So our approach was following the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment to put it in terms of those characteristics and what the consequences on plant health in the functioning plant system would be. And to do that, we focused on the provisioning, the regulation, and the cultural in those aspects. So here, again, I'm summarizing what was presented in a bit more detail with various examples in the second talk under the provisioning piece. Very highly variable. All plant systems have documented contribution to provisioning, except the urban tree example in Europe. States vary from poor to excellent, depending on what system we're looking at. And while there are trends reported in all directions, it's hard to make assessments in some of those sort of situations. I myself handled a lot of the stuff from North America. We know through breeding and other work, we do see yield increasing in the agronomic cropping systems, but that doesn't mean they're not being impacted by diseases, and that's the other aspect of this sort of conversation. In terms of regulating, levels of regulating services are highly variable. In all except 2 cases, what we can see, these regulating services are declining, and there's a strong decline in areas like potato in the Andes, urban trees in Europe, and horticulture in Africa. All sub-Saharan cases showed low levels and declines, and we've touched on some of that in the earlier talks as well. For cultural, we have fewer examples given the type of keystone plant systems we were looking at. They're very highly variable in this situation, and the cultural services are either stable or declining in relation to disease, not really seeing any improving trend across these reports. So let's try to summarize this maybe in a little different manner here as an overview, which leads into some of the implications that Neil will discuss. And so what we do here is we consider the proportions of ecoregion by plant system, those combinations, regarding plant health and disease impacts on the services. So we're going to go through this. Each slide, you're going to see the next piece come up in a very similar manner. So if we look at it from a plant health perspective, we can see as only fair or poor in a large number of these combinations of ecoregions and plant systems. And it is declining in the majority of them, and that's what you see in that lower pie chart with the arrow. So in over about 50% of the cases, fair or poor situation for plant health with a declining impact over the short term. In terms of the provisioning services, we can see it's often good. Those are the light green to dark green bars that are pies that you can see, but it's rarely increasing, and it's mostly stable and often showing towards a decline. So it's not in the last 10 years necessarily improving. In terms of our regulating services, what we can see, it's often insufficient or poor, as observed here in the pie chart, and declining in the great majority of those cases as well, which you can see in the lower pie with the downward arrow. And lastly, in terms of the cultural services, while this is a smaller sample size based on the combination ecoregion plant system, it is seldom assessed, and there's many cases of poor status and of declines in those sort of systems. I'm going to turn it over to Neil now, who's going to put this in terms of what are some of the implications, some of what are our findings going forward, which I think also are aligning with some of your questions.
So I will just introduce Neil. Neil McRoberts is professor at the University of California in Davis, and he's also a plant epidemiologist.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, everybody. The standard's been great so far. I'll try not to let it drop as we get towards the finishing line here. A quick comment on the questions that have been coming in. I think the questions, many of which are along the lines of why didn't you do this, or what happened to species Y, or did you consider thinking about this thing or the next thing? Many of those things were considered, and the effort that was made to do this exercise was really an heroic effort to ignore our tendency to think about detail and just do something that would be useful to stimulate discussion exactly in the way that it has. So if the thing that you're most interested in was not wrapped up in the first round of this assessment, then please do get involved, and we'll expand the scope for the next iteration. And the best way to get involved is to come to the round table meeting immediately afterwards, where your interests can be better represented, I'm sure, in a small scale discussion. But that is meant to be a very welcoming opening to everybody to participate in this exercise. So going forward, what are some of our major challenges? The assessment team identified several high priority areas. I'm going to introduce those one at a time. And the first one really that needs to be mentioned is the occurrences of pandemics and multiple emergencies or re-emergencies of classic problems. And really, amongst the many that could be mentioned, there are two areas where this is either a real current problem or potentially a very important problem. And those two areas that really need to be mentioned, and they've come up many times, are sub-Saharan Africa, where there are 1 billion people at risk, and in South Asia and East Asia, where some of the world's poorest people live. And while the state of plant health is slightly better there, the sheer number of people who depend on potentially fragile plant production systems makes those of concern. A couple of examples really come to mind. So obviously in sub-Saharan Africa, the state of banana, plantain, maize and cassava systems. But we have the emergence of diseases like false smut of rice. And one of the things that emerged from the analysis, which I think is particularly interesting, which perhaps hasn't been documented before, is that we see for the first time the emergence of these a series of coupled seasonal, regional scale disease systems involving vector movement across large scales in Asia. And so those are of concern going forward, and I think areas where we need to be vigilant and to carry on doing more detailed work than the assessment has done to document what's happening with those. In relation to climate change, obviously, there are many factors to talk about. A question from the floor has highlighted the importance of management in the status of health in forest systems, but there are interesting differences emerged during the assessment exercise in the extent to which the expert teams in different parts of the world were willing to attribute the change in status or the current status to climate change directly. Differences of opinion and attitude emerged clearly, and it's inherent in an exercise like this, which is based on expert opinion, that those sorts of things will happen. I see that as a strength of the GPHA, not a weakness. Clearly, it's difficult with a snapshot exercise like this to untangle things, and I understand for many people that's a frustrating outcome, but it's obvious that climate effects are often superimposed with pathogen spatial expansion that may not have anything to do underlyingly with climate change. It may be related to other factors, for example, the increasing volumes of global trade. And then finally, an important point to mention, because peri-urban vegetable production is such an important feature of nutrition across large parts of the world, Temperature-induced vector activity is a real concern. Insects, of course, having growth rates that are almost linear functions of accumulated temperature, and so as the temperature rises, as long as it stays below critical maximum values, you simply get more insects and more generations per year in many systems, not all. And of course, if those insects are vectors, that leads to an increase in disease transmission. And viral diseases in peri-urban systems are important, and consequently increases in vector activity are important in those systems. One of the features that emerge from our synthesis is that we still, after many decades of recognizing that genetic homogenization through selection can bring disbenefits with it, we still have difficulty implementing lessons that we can learn from nature about the value of diversity in our plant systems. And that emerged over time as we went through the synthesis of the results that were gathered. And there are three specific examples mentioned on one side of the slide here. So we have perennial multiple species plant systems, which are sources of food and material. This is particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. There are issues here with homogenization. On the other hand, there are instances when we found that interspecific diversity was quite frequent in annual field crops in that same region. So there are differences sometimes between the annual cropping system and the perennial cropping system in the same ecoregion. And then there is some evidence the experts considered that even here in France, in the Canal du Midi, there was some evidence that diversity was having an effect on reducing disease epidemics in the plane tree population as diseased trees are replaced by non-susceptible species. There are some encouraging findings that IPM is making headway in Europe's grapevine systems, and that genetic diversity in space and time generally may enhance resilience to plant diseases. I think that's something that emerged as a consensus point in many of the groups. And yet, despite all these potentially positive outcomes, many of our production systems and our managed forest systems still do not harness genetic diversity in any meaningful way over large scales to counteract the effects of plant disease, which isn't to say that it never happens, just that a broad take on what we observed was that it doesn't happen much. So we still seem to be having trouble harnessing inspiration from nature. An issue of high importance in the global north, in many economic systems in North America, here in Europe, very much a hot topic in the world of policy, that of pesticide use. And we unearthed an interesting diversity of situations when we try to think about pesticide use and the status of plant health. Not all systems currently necessarily have overuse of pesticide. In fact, the expert group looking at the coffee production systems in Central America consider that, in fact, there may be inadequate pesticide use in that system to achieve optimum plant health in the broad sense. Okay. Often, and particularly in industrialized agriculture, pesticides are the sole method of plant disease management, and we have well-documented instances of over-reliance. Potato production here in Western Europe would be one example where we might classify that we have an over-reliance on pesticide use. In some production systems, particularly valuable production systems, historically, the very rules that define the production system and give it some cultural value, like the AOC and DOC systems for wine production in France and Italy, bring with them constraints on production that can result in lock-in to chemical use. Not to point fingers at any production systems, but there is a complex interrelationship between history, culture, regulation, and pesticide use in some instances, which makes innovation and change difficult to enact. There are no easy answers for some of these things. In some systems, as a consequence of pesticide use, we see very obvious pathogen adaptation. Wheat in Western Europe would be an obvious example of that phenomenon. And then, of course, there are the things that we often worry about most and which policymakers ask us to think about a lot, which would be examples of what might be considered excessive pesticide use. And rice and potato in Eastern Asia would be examples of systems that may be classified in that way. And we are aware through the expert deliberations of the panels, the worrying tendency for there still to be instances of pesticide use around the world for products that were banned some time ago. And during the discussions, the experts mentioned those kinds of things on several occasions, known instances where that still occurs. It would be remiss of us not to mention the ongoing unfortunate situation in sub-Saharan Africa, so some further comment on that system as we think about the future is worthwhile. Plant diseases really do cause enormous losses in important crops in that region, as many of us are well aware. The main food crops, cassava, banana, plantain, and maize, are all subject to local and regional quite heavy losses due to plant diseases in that region. Of course, that's a direct threat to food security in that region, which supports a billion people, with indirect but severe impacts on other things, other resources, natural resources, and shifts in deforestation, effects on water and soil. So there are knock-on effects as well as the immediate effects on food security. There are knock-on socioeconomic effects, so there are immediate consequences on rural poverty when plant disease epidemics occur in that region on those important food crops. And therefore, there are shocks to the social and political system that may have consequences that last much longer than the epidemic themselves, and in turn induce feedback loops that can lead to instability in the socioeconomic system. So there's a complex set of factors that interact there. As plant pathologists, we can and should have something to say about how those feedback loops could perhaps be stabilized and some of the negative linkages broken in future. And then, as I've mentioned already, and as the other speakers have mentioned, but we want to reiterate this, although plant production systems, plant health generally in Asia and South Asia are generally better than in sub-Saharan Africa, the sheer numbers of people who depend on those systems in that region makes them potentially areas of high risk in terms of global food security. And so the assessment features those quite heavily for that reason, because of the potential negative consequences. Some of the questions that have been asked identify knowledge gaps, and those are many. This was a first attempt to do something like this, and we are well aware of the lack of coverage in some areas, but just to highlight some things where we know there are gaps. Urban forests, the Amazon forest system was covered, but in a way that leaves much to be done. There are the household garden systems around the world. Generally, there's a lack of data. And there are many remaining uncharted territories where we could do more. And in many of these situations, there's really a lack of collective scientific interest in even beginning to think about the data that could be collected. A problem in the Global South, unfortunately, is that there's a lack of ground truth data to validate the expert opinion that fed into the report, so we're less able to be certain about the expert judgments about what the status of plant health systems is. And that lack of ground truth data, of course, is a result of a lack of resources, chronic long-term withdrawal of effort to support extension, and other reductions in scientific communities in those areas. We need to highlight linkages among the dimensions of plant health, an emphasis on their effects on provisioning as a result of weak interest and lack of effort in to develop methods that links those to the regulating and cultural dimensions of plant health. This is truly an interdisciplinary issue, and in order for this type of exercise to have real benefit and impact in the long term, we have to be willing to climb out of our disciplinary silos, and which is an individual level a difficult choice to make, because it exposes you to the potential for criticism because you work in an area that's not your area of expertise. But without the willingness for more of us to become interdisciplinary, it's hard to imagine how some of these large-scale issues are ever going to be successfully tackled. So some directions for thoughts, and this is really, again, an invitation for more of the community to become involved at this point. Both in the global north and the global south, we see an encouraging willingness to become involved in the future from students when we talk to students about these issues, and there's a quotation on the slide there from students at Penn State University when several of us visited quite recently and sat down with the graduate program students in plant pathology. But those opinions are quite common amongst all the groups of students that we speak to, and so I would only say to those of you in the audience who are graduate students, please do get involved. The future that we're talking about is much more your future than my future. There's clear educational value in exposing students early in their careers to these multidisciplinary and multidimensional topics. There are clear benefits, I think, to the educational value they receive by thinking about difficult problems in complex systems, and the slide mentions several there that I think are fairly obvious. There are some issues with what we've done so far, and the assessment highlights those. Many of the questions that have come in have highlighted those. Even if we get away from the idea of using expert opinion and subjective judgment to try and do an assessment like this, if you go and look in the literature at objective methods, there's a lack of international standardization about how disease on plants is measured. Disease metrics are not the same the world over, and any exercise like this needs to have some kind of common platform to agree what it is that we're talking about. The issues that we face in terms of sharing information are, I'm sure, coming up at the conference in many different contexts as our ability to use data becomes ever more powerful. The need for data to be open, the need for international cooperation and open access only gets stronger, and the GPHA is in the same situation as every other effort at a large-scale international project in that concern. And then coming back to our two real crisis regions, or our two real regions of concern, going forward, it's hard to imagine how much can change without a reinvestment and a recommitment on the part of government to in those regions, and to the idea of extension and community support. Very little can be done if there are not independently financed extension and rural community development people on the ground in those situations. Not everything can be replaced by AI, unfortunately. Okay, so let's point our finger at ourselves and ask, what did we not do? Well, clearly this first effort at the GPHA is not comprehensive, and in some cases there simply wasn't sufficient literature available or sufficient experience for the experts to be confident of the assessments that they came to. And I think that's a really important point to make, but also the importance of that third tier of the assessment, how confident were we in what we said, is important not to forget. The report is not definitive by any means, and is very much open to criticism and re-engagement by the wider community. What did it do that can be considered positives? It identified many gaps in our knowledge. It identified questions that cut across regions and systems. And it highlighted that a voluntary collective action on the part of a group of scientists can actually achieve a fairly large outcome, if an imperfect one. And at this point, we'll make a slight diversion to mention that idea should not really be a surprise to anybody. And the Elinor Ostrom was awarded the Nobel Medal in economics in 2009 for pointing that point out from after studying many empirical cases of things like management of aquifers and fisheries and forest systems that were managed as common goods. So a framework already exists in the socioeconomics literature that we can use to direct our work in the larger sense as we try to contribute to this collective goal when we try to think about how to protect the public good of plant health, the global good of plant health. Many of you have posted questions during the session about the resources that were generated by the assessment. This is the second last slide in the slide set. So the e-book has been referred to several times, and there's an image of its cover and the link, which is also in the questions set. Several of you have posted the link. Thank you for doing that. There is a review article, a feature article that will be published in final format very soon in the journal Plant Disease. It's open access and currently available in early look version, so you can see the final manuscript. It's not yet been rendered into its final print version. And then finally, the third resource that's currently available is the website of the GPHA itself, where the links to those other resources can be found as well. And I will conclude by showing again the list of 100 scientists who carried out the assessment, and those of us who are here today to present the work on their behalf want to extend our thanks to them again for the enormous work they did as a voluntary group of people who came together to try and achieve a collective outcome. And at that point, I'll stop and take any questions that there are. Thank you.
I'm afraid we should finish soon, so we have not much time for questions. If there is really a very important question, please come to the microphone. Or,
yeah,
well, there is
this mic works.
Yeah.
You said that there is no simple solution for the topic of plant diseases, but I think one of the drivers of plant diseases is monoculture, and this happens because we consume a lot of meat and milk, and I think we have to keep looking for technical solutions, but a lot of the problems that we try to solve are actually maybe more political than they are scientific, in my personal opinion. Because, for example, if we take North America and Europe, maybe we should just simply admit that we can't continue to have such a high carbon footprint and try to politically enact things accordingly to the situation. So, for example, let's say we had a real will to do something, maybe we might start enforcing things like meat rationing or things like that, and maybe real traveling restrictions, or traveling rationing also. So I think it's good to look for technical and technological solutions, but maybe we also have to keep in mind that things are political.
I can't do anything but agree with you, and I'll simply point out that conceptually simple answers are always available. Pragmatically real simple answers very rarely are, and you mentioned that the solutions to some of these questions are socio-political, and anyone who thinks that the political system in Europe is easy to negotiate with a technical solution hasn't tried to do it, I would suggest.
Yeah, thanks.
So I think we can finish the session.